This is Lynn Fraser, moderator of the Radical Recovery Summit. Scott Kiloby is an author and international speaker on the subject of freedom through non-dual realization. He is a certified addiction treatment counselor, a registered addiction specialist, director of the Kiloby Center for Recovery, and founder of the Living Inquiries community. Julianne Ianniello is a senior facilitator of the Living Inquiries and co-owner of the Kiloby Center. She has worked hand-in-hand with Scott since 2012 on the development, training, and evolution of this work. Robert Butler has 20-plus years of sobriety and is a facilitator for the Living Inquiries. He started 2 natural rest groups to offer people a different approach that could be helpful. Lisa Muser is a somatic therapist, a senior Living Inquiries facilitator, and is deeply passionate about helping people create happier and more fulfilling lives. Brian Adler was trained in body-centered psychotherapy in the 90s at Naropa University. He has 25 years experience with mindfulness and somatic awareness and has been a facilitator of the Living Inquiries for 4 years. Welcome. This is Lynn Fraser, the moderator of the Radical Recovery Summit. We're going monthly now with interviews in between the annual summits, and today we have the Kiloby Center Aftercare team. Our focus today is on long-term recovery. We'll talk about how we do that at the Kiloby Center, but we'll also talk about what are the general principles of that, what's going on right now in the treatment field around long-term recovery, and how mindfulness specifically works into that. So Scott, would you like to start and tell us about your thoughts and views about long-care recovery, and then also bring in some of what happens at the Kiloby Center?
What's different about the Kiloby Center is that a lot of centers are doing mindfulness in certain ways. They'll have a track that's for mindfulness, so they'll have a few classes. So what we do at the Kiloby Center is the entire program is devoted to a somatic-based mindfulness approach that all of us here on the panel have been developing and using for years. So what we tend to do is, I'll just tell you from my own personal experience, my view of recovery has switched a 180 from when I first got into recovery. And so that view, that 180 switch has been infused into what we're doing at the Kiloby Center. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to light a fire within people to use this sort of awareness that's in our experience and the skills that we teach them to continue to deepen in their own life especially around the underlying issues. So for those are shame, often shame, trauma, and what we call deficiency stories. But the deficiency stories are identities or self-beliefs like, I'm not good enough, I'm a victim, whatever the story may be. Because the way that it shifted for me is when I first got into recovery, I thought, well, if I just stay clean and sober and do some work on myself and hang out with other people in recovery, that's going to take me all the way. And of course, the 180 switch was, that's not going to take me all the way. What's going to take me all the way is to really examine and resolve the issues that were driving me to the addiction in the first place, which again, for me, was shame, trauma, deficiency stories. So what we do during the treatment, the Kiloby Centers, get people excited, hopefully, about using this work to really find kind of a radical freedom, really to living in and as the present awareness, however you want to say that, living from and as the present moment, rather than from the story of me that's past and future based. It's not necessarily a simple and 1, 2, 3 process. You have to develop a skill and a practice and then begin to deepen in it. But what we do is hopefully light that fire in people, and then by the time we release them, whether that be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, we release them into our aftercare program. And we hope that we've lit that fire enough so that they have the readiness and the skill to then deepen and really be like enthused about it, like really want it for themselves. Because if they want it for themselves, then it's going to happen. It may take a while, it may take who knows how long, but the deeper freedom will happen. So all the people that you see on the panel play various roles in that, helping to support people in long-term recovery using the skills that we've developed.
Scott mentioned something about readiness. And Julianne, can you speak a little bit more to that and the role that it has in treatment?
Sure. I think readiness is really key. At our center, and I'm sure at other centers, we see people come in with various stages of readiness, both readiness to recover and readiness to do the work that it's going to take to get there, whether it's our work or any other kind of work. if somebody's really not ready, there's almost nothing that anyone can do. They have to find that place in themselves that says, I really want this and I need this and I'm going to do anything it takes to get there. Now, that said, even people who aren't ready, we can still work with them on the reasons they're not ready. What's blocking them? What's stopping them from being ready? Is there trauma that they're just afraid to face? And we can help them with that, help them to deal with the fear around that before we even get to working with the trauma. So we can work with any resistance that someone has, and if they're willing to go there and work with that, we see the readiness become more expansive. You know, they become more ready over time, and as they go deeper into our work, most people tend to just absolutely love it because they're facing things that no one ever asked them to look at before, and they're doing it in a safe way, you know, with people who are fully supportive, very, very supportive environment. So I think readiness is key. And if somebody's not ready immediately, that doesn't mean that they won't be. If not right now, maybe in a week or two, or maybe in a month, or maybe in a year, maybe 10 years. But that is going to help them go a long way toward recovery.
The interview that Dr. Gabor Mate did for the annual summit that we just finished, he talked about safety. That I'd asked him a question about courage, the courage that we need to do this kind of work, this looking in and being present with trauma. And he said, is it courage or is it safety? If we feel safe enough, then it doesn't actually take courage. Can you speak to that a little bit? How do you create that sense of safety for people at the center?
I think we create it in a few ways. We create a safe environment because we're all there. It's a non-judgment, completely non-judgmental environment. It's whatever somebody's feeling is allowed and accepted. And often they haven't even allowed and accepted those feelings in themselves. So when they finally hit us and it's like, okay to feel that, it's okay to feel what you're feeling, they're a little shocked, and it frees them up to feel safer to talk about what's really going on with them and to open up to look at it. The other way we do that, as you know, is in the sessions themselves, where we're looking at the fear and the resistance and the non-readiness. You know, what's really stopping you from that? Is it those thoughts? Is it that thought that's stopping you? Is it the feeling that's stopping you? How about that memory, the picture, that mental picture of that memory? Is that what's stopping you from feeling safe or being ready? So we also don't push. You know, if somebody's really not ready or doesn't feel safe looking at something, we're going to address that first. We're going to create a safe space before they even go into the stuff that they're afraid to look at. And we do that, you know, with the inquiry sessions. We also do that with the somatic work. We do a lot of different types of somatic work that can help release that sense of safety to, you know, to come bring someone back into balance, restore their nervous system so that they can feel safe.
And I'm wondering if I can say something about readiness from a different perspective that actually Julian just was getting into, which is the readiness of the nervous system. So I think your question was kind of geared more towards a psychological readiness or an intellectual readiness, or maybe a different kind, but there's also a readiness of the actual nervous system to be able to do inquiry, to be able to rest, to be able to look into the underlying issues of the addictions. And that's a pretty big part of the work that I do. And I'm guessing that, you know, at the center, it's paramount to being able to do this work. So I think it's important to mention, because in addiction work, almost nobody talks about or in any of this work, like nobody talks about the nervous system, but it's such a crucial aspect of healing and integration.
And the nervous system, there's such an impact of trauma on the nervous system. And
That's right.
even to work with the breath is often too much at the beginning.
That's right. Yeah. So it's so individual, and it can't be just a black and white. This is how you do it. It's so unique, like even moment to moment in a session, based on the person's system and where it's at, and how open or closed it is, if it's in fight or flight or freeze, et cetera, and so on. That's all going to have to be noticed and honored in order for that sense of safety to be recognized within the system, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the psyche as well.
Yeah, and it's up to us as facilitators to meet each client, each person exactly where they are.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because that is also going to help them to feel safe. It's okay to feel that. It's okay to feel not safe. That's what's here. That's what your moment is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's be present to that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to chime in on that too, because one thing I often tell clients is, as much as those voices want to be believed, even more than they want to be believed, they want to be honored. So like if somebody has some sort of, oh, I can't handle this coming up, it's extraordinary how quickly honoring that, listening to it, giving it a voice makes it relax, and then they're ready to go deeper. So listening to this, I can't handle it, is the gateway through to the next thing.
Yeah. And then they see they are handling it and that they can handle it. And so even if it means just going in a little bit at a time,
exactly,
we could do that.
Yeah.
We're speaking about readiness and it comes to addictions. I think one of the prevailing views is that either you're using or you're not using. And if you really look at what addiction is, it's not like that, because people either using drugs and alcohol maybe first, but then they have to, as a matter of safety, switch to sex, porn, sugar, gambling, shopping. They have to, because as Lisa said, their nervous system is not ready to simply give up all those things. So it's almost like you're holding on to the drugs and alcohol. And it's like, okay, now it's safe to do enough work to let go of that, but I got to hold on to these other things. And then as I explore those other things, explore the issues that we're talking about, finding out where I can, in my nervous system, in my body, in my mind, examine some of these things, then I can start to let go of these things, but not any time before I'm ready to do that. And so what I see as long-term recovery is really when you're letting go of all those things, but it certainly is a process of when your nervous system is actually ready, and it won't happen. It will not happen before you're actually ready and safe to deal with those issues. And that's why a lot of compassion is needed for everybody along the whole path, which can extend up to 20, 30, 40 years in recovery if you talk about really letting go of all these things and dealing with the issues.
That's a really important part, because our nervous system and our primitive brain take control when we feel that there's a threat. And it's only when the level of threat comes down that we're able to give up what we're using to manage. So yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. Mm-hmm.
Lynn?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd also like to talk about readiness in aftercare and long-term recovery, because that's also important. If someone is just coming to treatment and thinking they're going to be done with treatment and never use again, that's not realistic, right? So people have to be ready to make that lifelong, like Scott said, or long-term commitment to doing the work, to continuing to use the tools, to getting support, ongoing support. That is all going to help them in the long run. It's not only going to help them recover from using whatever their substance is, it's just going to help them in life. It's going to help their relationships, their work. It's just going to open everything up for them. They're going to be happy. But that does take a long-term commitment, and you have to be ready to be able to and want to do that long-term work.
So ideally, when someone's finished the program, they're on fire, they're committed, they're safe enough to want to do that. So the aftercare team here, Brian and Lisa and Rob, do you want to just talk a little bit about what happens once they get to aftercare, and how do you work with readiness, and how do you work with safety there?
Yeah, I can go first. So obviously the people that show up at the aftercare groups really vary from the first people who came out of the Kiloby Center years ago to people who came out last week. So the container is set for welcoming anybody at any stage of the recovery process. And like Julianne and Scott said, it is a process. It's not a finishing or a doneness, but they're welcome as they are in the process. So how I do the groups is really catered toward who shows up, and whoever's there, that kind of sets the tone in terms of how we do the looking, or what we might look into, or whatnot. But we always do spend a lot of time resting, and resting is something that our systems desperately need, and constantly, like, it's a renewal that we can benefit from all the time, but we don't do a lot. So we always do a lot of resting in the groups, and that right there, then and there, really does tend right away to the nervous system. We don't do anything complex with resting necessarily, just enough so that their nervous systems can find themselves, and they can become more intimate with their nervous systems. And then that gets the safety known in their systems right away. So that's just kind of what I would say off to start with. And then we do go into different issues that are coming up, how the inquiries are related in their life, the struggles, the joys, the celebrations, what's working, what's not, their needs. It really is used as a place to commune and connect.
And isolation is such a big issue with addiction.
That's right.
I can see that would be very important. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that when we meet them, we also set a platform that they can participate in any way that they choose, which means camera on, camera off. They don't have to speak, or they're able to speak, which really helps them to create an environment for themselves and promote self-care, which I think is really important. Another aspect of it is in my view, is to move forward the resources that the Kiloby Center created for them, such as real-time looking, the now process, and I heard it talked about here recently, really awakening this inner facilitator so that it can come into our experiences when we're out there in the world and meet us where we really are. And as we move forward with those resources of using real-time looking in Aftercare, it's a similar experience to what they were experiencing at the center, but it also continues to move forward. I think in my own experience, I just noticed that it starts showing up, that it just starts to meet me in the environment that I'm in. It's not something I'm provoking or I'm trying to do, which sometimes creates a disconnect, but it's actually showing up on its own, which then the work starts to really speak to you.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to dovetail on what Lisa and Robert were saying. In the groups that I lead, people identifying, recognizing either their access to rest or what seems to be coming up as an obstacle to rest is always, I would say, a principle or a theme, regardless of the specifics that comprises the group. And so what I think what happens for all of us, honestly, for myself included, is in that accessing rest, and this comes back to what Scott was talking about, we're falling in love again with this process and with the experience of ourselves that the process facilitates. And so almost every week, by the end, there's like this mutual appreciation of, kind of in a way, of how miraculous it is to feel that sense of well-being regardless of what's going on. And I see again and again that people come to the group and it relights, they get an experience of that being relit, or it's burning more brightly. Mm-hmm. And so it keeps the flame going. I think that's my sense of it, is that's one of the most important things that happens in the aftercare groups.
Can I just add too, because I noticed that I love it that we use our own language, but sometimes we have to translate the language for people who are listening. So, because when we use the word rest, some people will think, oh, you mean like getting more sleep or lying down, and we're not referring to that. So if you've never been around these teachings, rest is referring to recognizing that which in us, which is aware of everything, mindfully aware of everything, thoughts, feelings, sensations, colors, shapes. And then resting with means to be with whatever's there directly from awareness and allow it to be as it is. And then to, it goes much deeper than that. Obviously, you can bring up stuff that you didn't even know that was there. But so when we say rest, we don't mean sleep or sitting down or sitting still. We mean being from awareness, observing and allowing and accepting what's there, loving what's there. So just if there's any other language issues, let's kind of clear them up for the audience. But so we put that out there.
I want to add to that, because this is actually the theme of the group that we did just last Sunday. The experience of simultaneously genuinely feeling good while experiencing something that has previously been troubling, even profoundly troubling. We all imagine that, I think before coming into this, people imagine that recovery means the thing is gone. And it's nice if it's not present for a moment, but the miracle is to have it here and to feel confident and good in relationship to it. And that's the thing, like, you know, when someone, this thing that has been terrorizing them for so long, it actually feels okay that it's here. That's the beautiful thing that I think makes people fall in love with this process.
That's another beautiful thing that I like to translate too, is this goes to the heart of how what we're doing is different, because our culture does like to be fixed. We like to be fixed. We, like Julianne said, come in and fix me, do something, and then make the thing go away. But what Brian is saying, so let's talk about progress versus process, if you say it that way. The process that we're using is one that allows things to be as they are, so that when pain is coming up, as Brian says, you learn how to lovingly be with it, which is a really radical and beautiful thing, because we're so used to, when pain comes up, what can I do to distract myself, medicate, get rid of it? So to learn how to be with something and actually to feel that sense of well-being and awareness that's there along with the pain is really a radical and beautiful thing. That's the process. What I will say, that in terms of the progress, there is progress, but it's if you get really fixated on progress, you're going to suffer in this way, or you're going to suffer anyway, because you're always going to be trying to get somewhere else. So what the progress that I see happens with this work long term is that this stuff that arises that creates problems for us and that upsets us tends to, over time, start, but it's like a trajectory. It starts to arise less and less, and it's not going to come with bells and whistles necessarily. It's not going to be like suddenly everything is gone. It's more like over time you start saying you're just bothered less by this and bothered less by that. And the more you're able to be with things as they arise, and the more you're able to be with things as they arise, the more the thing tends to fall away. So it's a gentle kind of falling away process that, which, by the way, I think in the end is much more profoundly depthful than anything that gets rid of something immediately. I have suspicions of anything that says it gets rid of something completely, because we're conditioned to sort of act and behave and think in certain ways, and the conditioning keeps coming up. But real recovery, I'll just use that term, to me, is when we're actually meeting things and being with things as they arise, and then the progress is that they do slowly fade away. People need to know that there's progress in any recovery program. It's a thing that we struggle with as facilitators, because our process is not about progress. Our process is about being with what arises. I would not be in this way of recovery if there was no progress. Okay, if this didn't lead to the falling away of addictions and the unearthing and resolving of traumas and shame, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. There has to be progress. But just wanted to clear that part up.
Yeah, I'd like to also add to what Scott's talking about, is that is exactly what inquiry does. Anybody that's done any inquiry for any period of time, what it has done is it awakens that compassion that's in us and that nurturing that's in us to then come up and start meeting our experiences. And for me, the nurturing and the compassion had been pushed way down. It wasn't in the forefront of my experience anymore. That's what trauma and shame had done. It had covered over top of that and not made that available to come up and meet my everyday experiences. So it wasn't something I had to focus on. I wasn't focusing on the nurturing or the compassion and trying to get somewhere. I was simply meeting what was ever coming up, and with the help of another facilitator or doing self-facilitation, awakening. And I didn't know any of that at the time. That's how come the work actually speaks to us as we actually do it. It becomes the teacher, because from that work, we are actually able to then go out and start meeting things that we weren't before. And that's what I see is the how a rehab center plays its role. If it's able to install that resourcing and that nurturing and start waking those elements up when you go back out into the world, because let's face it, we all go back to the same environment. And since I was in 3 different rehabs and failed 2 of those, I came out of the 3rd one and stayed sober. But it was the ability to waken up, because I went right back to where I had always gone to, in the exact same environment, around the exact same people. And while I was making those changes, I was still having to deal with my inner state, my inner reaction that was going on, which made 12-step difficult for me, because I found a lot of that triggering going on in the 12-step, but it was the only model available back then. So it was really a choice between 2 pains. Was I going to go and sit in those groups and be triggered by the people that were in there, my issues start coming up, or was I going to continue to go back to drink? I mean, that's really the choice that I had to make at the time. and the pain of drinking was much greater than the pain of going and sitting in those rooms.
So I would like to follow up here on this intersection around awareness. We've used that term a few times, and seeing from awareness and enlightenment and all of those things that come into this. Where's the intersection around recovery and awareness? And do you want to start with that, Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to speak from my own experience. Like I said, there's been a 180 shift. When I first got into recovery, I think I was heavily identified with what we call ego. I mean, my story was who I am. But my past and my future thoughts are who I am, and the feelings that come up with them. They were so believed and so identified with that it was never questioned. So when you're living in that ego state, you know, recovery is often about, it's something very different than how I see it now. It's about sort of like really navigating the ego, navigating life through the ego, trying to make the ego better, tell a better story, whatever. So with awareness, you start to be able to see that the story is not ultimately who you are. So you start looking and being from something that's already awake within you, that you just didn't know was there. So you're sort of waking up to that awareness that's here. So that's the start of this path. You could say that's not the end of it. So when you start to recognize that awareness, it's a profound like doorway into a greater and deeper looking into what's really going on. And then you start to find all the stuff that was wrapped up into that ego, the trauma, the shame, all the sense, the limiting self-beliefs, the somatic stuff, the repressed emotions, the hiding, the lying, all the stuff gets to come up, and you can examine that. And from awareness, then you have, so if you've not experienced awareness, if you're listening, you don't know what I mean. There's no way to understand what I mean. All you can do is listen to us or work with us and start to recognize that awareness is in your experience. And then as that is seen as the foundation of experience, then you can begin to examine the phenomena. And the phenomena are the thoughts, the feelings, emotions, and sensations. Whereas when you're identified with the ego, you think the thoughts and feelings and emotions and sensations are you. As you awaken, you find that they're not you, they're coming and going to you. And that's what gives you the opportunity to examine them from a different place, from awareness, rather than I'm inside it, it's me. So that's it's hard to talk about. That's the best I can do right now.
I think it's useful to go back to the whole sense of doneness, because that arises a lot with the topic of enlightenment and awakening, and it comes up a lot with this idea of recovery. Like, oh, I'm done now. I'm not drinking now. And the way that we approach that is it comes back to the process. The progress will find each person when they're committed to the process. But I think the mindset is really important, because when you have a mindset that there is a doneness, there is an accomplishing, there is a graduation from, that mindset itself causes suffering. And of course, we all get to look at that within ourselves or with the assistance of somebody else, because that mindset itself is a loop that the mind will not solve itself out of. But it will continue to try. And so that's the seeking suffering addiction right there. So once we shift out of that mindset that recovery isn't a doneness or a graduation, that enlightenment or awakening, whatever we want to call it, isn't an arrival point or a finishing end, we can then more integritously or willingly maybe connect to this journey that we're on. And it becomes self-evident after you start to become intimate with it. It becomes an undoubtable knowing that this is a journey.
If I can say one more thing, just because your question was, how does this enlightenment awakening tie to recovery? And I'm not sure exactly that I answered it, but that story itself, when it's predominant in our experience, it has certain things that go with it. And it's a sense of neediness and a feeling of deficiency or lack. It's often traumatized as trauma throughout the whole system, not just in the story. So what we're saying is that as you begin to examine these things from awareness, and some of these things begin to relax over time through the process, then that sense of separation that comes with the ego relaxes. As that sense of separation relaxes and you're sort of living from and as that awareness, then the neediness and the deficiency and the lack is not running your life as much anymore. Therefore, the addictions are not as present. That's how it unfolds over time. It's not something that happens in 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days. But we can light the fire in you to become interested in that time.
Yep.
Lynn?
Yeah, go ahead.
What we see a lot is, most people do not come to our center looking for enlightenment or awakening. They want to stop using their substance. Maybe they've overdosed a few times and they don't want to die. And so we're giving them the tools, we're educating them and teaching them how to do this, how to be completely present, how to get back into your body and allow everything that's here. And we super simplify everything so that even people who are brand new to this work can understand it and start to practice it on their own. And that's a tool that they can take with them, throughout their life. Some, in fact, many, I think, do get to feel that experience, that sense of, I'm not my body, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my past, I'm not my history, and really experience that profound sense of everything's okay, even when it's not okay. And so it's kind of an interesting mix, I think, that we get here, where it's not necessarily what they're coming for, but many do get to experience that at least a few times while they're here. And that can be something that carries them forward. Even though that's not necessarily what they were looking for, it helps them as they continue in their recovery.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Like the idea that troubling thoughts and feelings are going to stop arising. I mean, I can see how that's certainly possible, but it's when it's the goal, I think it's a pretty counterproductive goal. But having a changed relationship to the thoughts and feelings when they arise, that's an extremely realistic goal. People touch it even when they're still at the center. And so I feel like the aftercare role in that is really just continually reinforcing that what we're doing is changing our relationship to thoughts and feelings. We're not doing some process that's going to ensure that they don't come up anymore. And people touch that again and again and again. And I think that's the thing that makes them fall in love is that discovery.
That's beautifully said. Thank you. Because I don't even think I can say it any clearer than Brian said it. But that's what makes people fall in love with this process, is when they recognize that this is a change in relationship to their experience. They stop thinking that this is a way that they're going to fix themselves, in some fail swoop.
Well, and that brings us right back to safety. So once people realize that they can be present with whatever it is that's coming up, then we have the safety to be present with it. We don't have to go off into an addiction. Yeah. One of the core kind of principles of the living inquiries is that thoughts, which are words and pictures, are Velcro to energy, sensations, and feelings in the body. And this process of looking is what unvelcros them, and that's what creates the space where we can be present. Mm-hmm. A number of people have been in recovery for many years, and many of them have been in 12-step programs. So could you just speak a bit about how is this program, or how is what we do applicable to people who've been in recovery for a long time already?
So I guess I'll start with that. This is my experience, and along with a lot of other people that I happen to know, is that I was in recovery for 8 years before I understood that there was trauma in my experience. It took 8 years in recovery to even begin to start looking at that. I know that I'm not alone. I now know that not because I'm speculating. I've met other people who've gone through the same thing. I'm actually, one of my roommates right now is the same. He was a guy who went through recovery, was in the truck, came up. he didn't know how to deal with it there. He had to come to our work to deal with it. So I think that there's a lot of people, if I know people just within my circle, there's got to be a lot of people out there who've been in recovery or abstinent for a number of years, and they're bumping up against some sort of suffering, and they're not really sure how to deal with it. That's what we're really good at, is helping you deal with that stuff that's like really deeply rooted, the trauma and the shame. So I know Robert can respond to this question too.
Yeah, and I'd been sober for a long time before I realized that trauma was really guiding my experience still. And I can also speak to how awareness actually helped me go in, which was the tool that, being present with it and being aware of it. And as we used that tool, how that went in to meet my experience, which allowed it to come up. For a long time, it had just been suppressed. I hoped it would go away and then I would get over it. That's not the experience I had. So finding different tools to use, I was able to meet these experiences that I was having in a much more mindful way.
So let's talk about, when we say trauma, a lot of people thinking wars, some kind of serious violent abuse. What do we mean when we say trauma?
I like to hear from others, but just a short definition is it's anything that happened that was emotionally overwhelming and that you didn't process in a healthy way. So that could be, yes, a war or sexual molestation, but it could also be just 5 to 10 years of being with a father who looked at you in a rejecting or judgmental way, or an overly controlling mother, or lots of breakups that were very painful. So it's highly subjective. Trauma is only trauma if it's trauma for you. There's no textbook that can tell you whether you're experiencing trauma. You know it in your system, or you're going to feel it in your system. And then we tend to get triggered. We tend to do a bunch of things after the event to try to cope with the feeling that we haven't processed. We tend to get triggered by similar events or people that bring back that. And then we're just holding on to emotion that hasn't been safe for us to feel. That's one definition, but you can go to the textbook definition too and read about it.
I like what Scott said about his definition, but I think what I want to add into it is that the result of the trauma, whatever it is pain. And what we do the rest of our lives then is to either numb the pain that we've experienced, try to escape it or avoid it, and that lands us in the world of addiction, whether it's being addicted to trying to figure things out, or addicted to alcohol, or addicted to sex, or addicted to love, and so on and so forth. To any kind of escape of experiencing or meeting or feeling pain will lead one to addictive behavior. And that's, again, why it becomes a journey as opposed to a finishing, because our culture is set up to avoid pain, right? So we have to relearn and find another way to live in this culture that is supporting the dissociation from pain, right? So pain becomes this taboo thing, but as we all know, the way to the other side is through. So as we connect to pain, or have someone lead us through, and the other day I sent Scott an email and I said, I kind of consider myself a pain midwife right now. Pain is very intense. It's not something that anyone wants to feel. No one's like, yay. So it comes back to that readiness of the nervous system, and the willingness, and then the capacity and ability and safety to be with someone who will slowly and very gently guide us through that which we do not want to come to. And that is a process. It takes its time. It has its own wisdom and its own divinity, and the progress will reveal itself, but it is through a process. So I just want to mention pain because I haven't really heard it a lot in our discussion here, but it's something really paramount behind addiction, and it's linked to all the core deficiency stories, and it's like the elephant in the room that will require being met at some point.
I'd like to add to what Scott and Lisa said. In any experience that is overwhelming, that in the moment that the experience is happening, there's a sense of lacking the resources to meet it, is going to get somaticized, which is where the pain comes from. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is, I sort of think of it as like, there's a whole lot of undigested experiences stuck in the body, and we go back to them essentially in order to digest them. And until that happens, they're going to be there. And as they accumulate, it is extraordinarily painful.
I just want to say just a couple things. Some people might be listening going, oh my God, you know, they're going to shove me into my pain or make me look at my pain. And that's just so not the process that we do. The process that we do is so devoted to compassion and love that it would be contrary to force anyone into anything. That's so not our invitation here. So pain will reveal itself when it's ready to be met, and not a moment before. And our job is just to support every person in that journey.
Yeah, it's almost the exact opposite of forcing. Like I think that
That's
one
right.
of the key things that is healing of trauma is honoring the part of the psyche that's saying no. Like the more the no gets honored, there's an organic and natural finding of the yes.
Yeah, that's right.
I just want to say that I love everything you guys are saying. This is why our program and this kind of work, whether it's through us or someone else dealing with the deep somatic traumas and the deep work, is so important for people, even who've been in recovery for many years and haven't had a drink in many years, because they might be white knuckling it through. You know, they're still feeling the pain inside. They're still feeling the effects of the trauma, and maybe aren't even conscious of where it comes from. And so this work can help people really get at that and to release that pain, so they don't have to white knuckle anything. They can actually be free of the drives or of the cravings and live a normal, calm, happy existence.
One other thing I wanted to mention is that sometimes when people are listening to us, they may think of like, wow, this seems like a lot of work. You know, I heard that the other day at the summit. Someone said, well, that feels like a lot of work. It really isn't. And I think everybody on here will attest to, because of the disposition that you take with the stuff. We're only telling you to be with what's arising right now. We're not telling you to form a belief that you got to keep doing this and this and this and this until someday down the road you'll get free. We're actually telling you to just be present to what is right now. That's the simplest thing on earth. There's nothing more simple than that. And so if it's simplified down to that way, then you start to recognize also that if you want to talk about work, think about all the work that it took to learn all the suffering that we carry around. You know, we had to learn how to become addicted as a coping mechanism. We had to learn how to not feel what was coming up. We had to learn how to distract ourselves. We had to learn how to do all these things. So really, this is an unlearning of that. And once you get that fire, that readiness that we talked about, which is you can't put it in a bottle. There's no way, you can't give it to people. But once it's there, and when you light that fire, it in no way feels like you're working towards something. You feel like you're simply relating from things in the present moment. You're not thinking, I'm doing this so that I can get there. And that's one of the great things that I love about this work, because it's so not about the way we often think of things. Like it's so, until you have that shift into what we're doing, you may not even hear what I'm saying, but trust me that it's not felt that way, that we're doing a lot of work to get somewhere.
So Scott, do you want to address the issue of how relapse is treated in aftercare? So someone's been at the center, they've left, they're in the aftercare groups, and they've had a relapse. What happens then?
Well, first of all, I don't even like the word relapse, okay? It's something that I'm trying to find a different word, because there's a problem with that we still tend to look at mental illness or addiction as a moral failing, and we have the language from the past still hovering around us. Relapse sounds like it in a sense, like if you relapse on cancer, your doctor or your nurses are not going to morally judge you. But the word relapse in addiction treatment has a certain sort of stigma around it. Like, oh, he wasn't able to do it. Once again, he fell off the wagon. And that kind of judgment and stuff is sometimes deeply internalized by people and brings up shame. And then that shame is not resolved. So what we're trying to do is create an atmosphere where, hey, if you went and used again, fine. That's fine. Come back if you're ready, and we're ready to take a look at whatever drove you to do that. You're as welcome here as anybody. And I think the 12-step program, one thing that's really good, I really like about the 12-step program, But let's just think of it as, okay, relapse, it doesn't have to happen, but it often does happen, using again. So there's that. The other thing is I also, there's for me, it's important when people stop using drugs and alcohol. I totally get that. That is not recovery to me, though. Because if you look, you'll notice that if you go into recovery rooms, everybody's like, I've got 10 years sober, and then they've got their head in the coffee pot. They've got their they're going home and they're on the computer on porn for 4 hours. And so if we can widen the discussion to see, like, we're in pain, people, we're all in pain, and we're trying to deal with it. And if we can open the discussion up to say, instead of talking about relapse, say, in what ways am I trying to cope with my pain? And can I then examine those things that are leading me to cope with pain? And then you have this thing where you can really start to recover from all of these things. And then we're not focused so much on clean time, too. This is another thing. If people say, well, I've got 2 years clean, congratulations, that's wonderful. However, in what ways are you dealing with the underlying things? Because if you don't, the 2 years, it's going to be your identity. And if it falls away with the relapse, then who are you? And more can we focus on, are you taking care of yourself today? Are you examining the issues that are underlying? Is there a greater sense of well-being and peace in your life? Are you examining the substitutions and all this stuff? Are you just simply still counting time? That's why I would like to change the whole subject around relapse and recovery.
Mm-hmm. So want to share on that, Brian?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I definitely noticed that over time, people will cycle in and out of being really consistent with coming to the weekly group, and often what will bring them back is if they haven't started using again, but they've in some way recognized that they're having a hard time. And there's sort of like a self-correcting process where that recognition that they're having a hard time reminds them to come back, not just come back to the group, but also come back to themselves and come back to this process. And so I think it's ideally, our threshold of how much discomfort is required to become curious again becomes less, but it's built in, and it's beautiful that recognition brings us back.
Mm-hmm. So we're getting towards the end of our time. What is it that's really important that we haven't said yet? Maybe we could just have a few last thoughts from people that you'd really like to leave with people. We're talking about long-term recovery, really supporting ourselves in aftercare. And what are some of the things that would be very helpful for people to know? Julianne, do you want to start?
Sure. I think in part because we were just talking about, relapse and what that might mean. And, often people, if someone has a drink, maybe they haven't had a drink in 6 months or a year, and they have one drink, they go into this deficiency story that I'm a bad person, I messed up, so, I might as well just keep drinking more. It doesn't have to be that way. A little slip doesn't mean you're full on in the addiction again. You can always come back to this moment. No matter what is happening, you can always come back to this moment. And these tools, I think in particular, these are the best tools I've ever found to help in my own life. You can always come back to this moment. You can always pick up the tools again and start using them, and they can help. And there's always support in our community, in other communities. Get help, get support. You don't have to do it alone.
I think we've hit on so many of the things that so I don't want to go over them, but what I would just say is that if you are in pain, come to us and let us help you start to examine what lies at the root of that pain. Isn't that what Lisa was saying, that it's really about pain? And when we talk about addiction is just a way to cope with pain. So it just is such a broad thing. I just want to say to everybody is, if you're in pain, are you upset, is the thing that we often say. Are you upset? And often people are upset on a continual basis. Then you're the kind of candidate that would really be good for this kind of work, because it really helps you to hold that upset in a new way in a loving way, and ultimately to resolve it.
Yeah, I'd like to add also that if you are in 12-step, but it doesn't feel like it's been complete for you, no one's saying that you have to get rid of your 12-step program, but that there's other alternatives available to you out there. You could still go to AA and try natural rest. I found that the 12-step was a great foundation. It was a good model. It's readily available everywhere you go. But I didn't find everything I needed there. So I really appreciated the new approach and the new innovations and the new tools that have been made available, because they've changed my experience.
I'd like to say a few things about self-love and self-compassion. It's so trite, and we hear it all the time. And for some of us, it's super easy to give others love and compassion. But this whole self-love and self-compassion gig is so hard sometimes. It's such the journey. And I think the nuances of it really can be skipped over. And for me, part of the beauty of this process has been being held and supported by people who can offer or extend a sense of allowance and acceptance to me, that have allowed my own sense of love and acceptance to arise. I literally had to be taught how to love myself. It didn't come naturally. It didn't just show up. I had to be shown and demonstrated how to find compassion for myself. And it came through an intimacy with a facilitator or facilitators, and then a continued inward looking and meeting of all that was coming up in me and all the things that kept me from directly experiencing that. Lots of critical voices in my head, lots of self-judgment, self-loathing, self-hatred, all of that got to be met. And on the other side of that was beauty and compassion and love. And it was really an important part of my journey, and continues to be. So.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I really see this process ultimately as being about experiencing compassion with regard to all the thoughts and feelings that that might arise, and the confidence that I feel personally in having access to that compassion is what's the word? It's like, it's invaluable. And when clients in some way or another ask me, will there ever be an end to this? Usually what I say is something like, there might be, there definitely might be, but long before there'll be an end to it, there'll be such a compassionate regard for it that there won't need to be. So that's where my love of this work comes from.
Thank you all. This has been really interesting, and a really good example of what a mindfulness-based recovery long-term program can look like. Some of the really key elements around radical recovery, which is what we're going to in this summit. Did you want to finish with anything, Scott?
Well, I just wanted to let, as the people are listening to us, they may think, well, this is only available for people who've been to the Kiloby Center. So I want to make sure that people know that just anybody out there can access this work. Just give a few resources if I could. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if you need to come to treatment, the Kiloby Center is here, kilobycenter.com. But for those who've been in recovery for a while, and as Robert said, want to sort of integrate and branch out in a new way, these are facilitators that you're looking at. They're skilled, certified, trained facilitators who come with a varied background, not just in my work, but in lots of different work in this area. They're healers. So, for example, Lisa, Robert, and Brian do private sessions with people. I think that the best way to reach them probably is through the livinginquiries.com site. You can also reach, Robert has a natural rest group, and I believe Lynn has her daily meditations listed on the site. If you go to my site, naturalrestforaddiction.com, and then go to the resources tab, and then in our groups, under that tab, you'll see weekly groups that are available to the public. And then there are also groups that facilitators and other facilitators offer on group inquiry and group processes that you can find. And you're probably going to find them mostly, again, at the livinginquiries.com site. So just want to let people know it's not just for people. This is really good for like parents who have kids who are addicted and who are dealing with, I need to fix my kid, I'm feeling helpless. But really, it's about just any form. Like, are you upset? If you are, then reach out to some of these people who are there to help online and here at the center.
There's also a lot of free audios and videos on the website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and money can be an issue for people. And there are, when you're working privately with somebody, obviously there's an exchange of money, and there are a lot of free resources there. Yeah. Well, thank you all for being part of this. Go to kilobyscenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit, to see the full schedule of speakers and to register to watch these free online in the Radical Recovery Summit 2017.